All right, we call to order the Wednesday, September 27th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Can we please get roll call?
Commissioner Isiano,
Here.
Commissioner Fajardo,
Present.
Commissioner Lopez,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Franz,
Here.
Chairperson Rodriguez-Ceja.
Here. Okay, and Commissioner Fajardo, will you lead us in the pledge? All right, time for public comments for items not on the agenda.
There are none.
All right, and we have no minutes, no public hearings, and no action items, so we'll move straight into our study session.
All right, so good evening, Commission. As requested, the Commission this evening will be doing a study session on the topic of fuel stations. The Commission, by consensus at your last meeting, had requested discussion, agendized discussion of the issues around current regulations and other related matters for gasoline or fuel stations in the city. As discussed at that last meeting, staff is basically we're kind of requesting kind of a, if you will, a funneling of your areas of concern. As discussed at the last meeting, we have limited resources, and so being able to do any sort of substantive analysis is going to be difficult for us, but we can do some limited analysis. Kendra and I have talked, for example, we could do something akin to what we did for the moratorium of mini storage facilities, where we provided you not only the information about facilities in the city, but also in the surrounding communities. But substantive analysis, data analysis, quite simply, we don't have the capacity for currently as staff. We also don't, not only do we not have the capacity in terms of resources, we may also have not have the capacity in terms of skill sets and or experience. So with that, what we recommend the Commission do is have an open conversation. This is a study session, so it's more informal. And if you are able to help narrow down your areas of interest for staff so that we're able to focus any follow-up information that we need to provide you, that would be very much appreciated. So with that, if there's any questions of Kendra and myself, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, we will be attentive listeners and chime in as needed.
So we didn't get a chance to do any of the sort of overlays that we discussed the last time?
We do not, there's no real capacity for us to do the overlays. So we can bring up the CalEnviro screen on the website, on the website for CalEnviro screen. But to do overlay works, that's something that we currently don't have the capacity in this, on our team or city team to do. So we're happy to bring that up if you want to utilize it as background data for your conversation. We can certainly do that while you are beginning your conversation. We can bring that up, or any other information that's web-based.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this in any way that you all feel comfortable. I think for me, the first thing that I would be interested in, what I had, what I was interested in seeing is really the location of these gas stations in relation to the disadvantaged communities. And I just, if there's a possible way for us to maybe dive in and take a look at what we can see in the CalEnviro screen now. It'll be hard for us to get really deep into what the concentration looks like. So I do want to acknowledge that, but maybe that's like a good starting point. Kendra, if you could identify the disadvantaged communities within the city of Indio.
And just for the record, sorry. That was a question regarding the overlay, correct, Mr. Ceja? And then for definition's sake, what do we mean by disadvantaged communities?
So the concept, and I'll open it, I think Kendra can give a much more detailed response, but basically the state has identified areas throughout the state that they consider disadvantaged communities. So for example, you are sitting in one. downtown, parts of downtown are considered a disadvantaged community. The Jewel neighborhood, the area north of Avenue 45 and east of Jackson Street, is also considered a disadvantaged neighborhood. We actually prepared a what was called Transformative Climate Communities Plan. Some of the commissioner members may remember that. And it was prepared for these two areas, the two areas of the city I just discussed, based on that designation as disadvantaged communities. So there's certain demographic, for lack of a better word, profiles that areas of cities fit based on the Calambiro screen that earn that designation, so to speak, and those are examples of two in the city. And Kendra may or may not want to provide further, but I'll leave it up to her.
I believe the U.S. Census determines that as well. So if you look at specific census tracts, they define what is a low-income disadvantaged community or a LIDAC community, and then they define that further on their website. So we can go to their website and find the actual definition, just so I don't misspeak on what they consider qualifies a community to be considered low-income disadvantaged communities. Sorry, I'm standing up here because it's hard for me to see, so I'm trying to get to where we need to go. So Calambiro screen pretty much just shows the different pollutant levels for certain things, whether it's ozone, PM 2.5, which stands for particulate matter 2.5. They also have PM 10, again, particulate matter 10, which is a bit of a bigger particulate matter than PM 2.5. I think it's about the size of maybe a hair strand. 2.5 is smaller, and both of those are toxic air contaminants that could stick to the lining of your lungs, essentially. It's a very oversimplified statement on that, but essentially that's what it is. And this is a public website that anybody can go on. You don't need to work for a government agency to be able to view things on there. I'll just go to City Hall and then we can navigate from there. So this legend, they have one of these for every subcategory on the side here, and it just shows you the different percentiles. So you can kind of see what levels are present in specific areas. So again, this is just for ozone. I'm not sure what other items you'd be interested in looking at. If you see anything on these subcategories that's of interest to you, or even on these lower ones here, such as asthma, cardiovascular disease, education level, housing burden, poverty, unemployment, we can toggle to those as well.
Yeah, I think for what, the markers, as my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, for the disadvantaged communities has a lot to do with income. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe housing burden might be a good one for us to look at. And then it's my understanding there is like a specific one that outlines the disadvantaged communities. That isn't one of, it's like a specific marker, but we can.
So this here, as shown, shows the housing burden percentile for the city of Indio. Again, this is near the downtown area. So as we zoom out, you can start to see where areas are more and less impacted. Do you guys have a copy of the gas station map, like a hard copy of it? Do you guys want a hard copy of it?
Sure, we'll take it.
Just for comparison?
Yeah. And just for clarification, housing burden means these folks in the darker areas are currently paying more than 30% of their household income into housing.
I'm trying to bring up what this is defined as here, but I'm having a hard time.
Mm.
So it's defined further here. So housing burden low-income households are households that are both low-income and highly burdened by housing costs. So indicator included in CalVIRA screen, housing affordability, residents of low-income households with high housing costs may suffer adverse health impacts. The fraction of low-income households paying more than 50% of their income on housing is on the rise. The housing burden indicator takes into account the regional cost of living for both homeowners and renters and includes the cost of utilities. So yes, the darker colors are the ones that are impacted a bit more than the lighter color areas.
Is there a way to bring back the legend?
Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. They're pretty impactful graphics to see. The city of Indio in its entirety has some level of housing burden, has some level of, all of these things that are on here. The city as a whole, so just seeing the graphics, I think is pretty impactful.
It's interesting that Indian Palms Country Club is green or clear.
It's also interesting that La Quinta Country Club is pretty dark shade.
It's shaded up, yeah?
Yeah, Rancho La Quinta Country Club, right? Yeah, that's interesting.
No, the La Quinta Country Club, the one that's
Right
more
next to
closer to the resort
Yeah.
off of Eisenhower. That's pretty dark.
Is there any way for us to pull up the actual designated low disadvantaged communities? Because what we're seeing here is just sort of citywide housing burden, but then there are very specific designations, and I know that that's not all of the communities, and that's really based on the census tract. So I think what I'm interested in, and I'll say the reason why I think that's important is because, I did a little bit of, digging around myself, and this is why I was asking if we could do this study with you all that are the experts, that it seems like there is a high concentration of gas stations on or nearby those communities. And so, part of what I think would be good to understand is that the case would be one of the questions that I would be interested in doing. And if that is the case, what is the role of our city government as far as addressing inequities in these types of developments, in these types of communities? So I would be first. The other question that I think I would have that I think would be really good to answer is similar to the way that we did with the storage facilities, in that we wanted to understand not only the market need, because I think that's important, but how is other cities, neighboring cities, picking up some of that as well, right? Because I wouldn't want us to go down a path where we're saying, well, is Indio not interested in these types of developments anymore? Like, I want to see how are we comparing to other cities, and are we meeting the market demand?
And if I can add to that too, Commissioner Ceja, the question for me would be, in comparison to other cities, the number of gas stations that we have comparable to other neighboring cities, and then if those neighboring cities have those climate, mobilization strategies that aim towards carbon neutrality and what that looks like, and if the city of Indio is talking about doing the same at some point in the future.
So if I could jump in, so the City of Indio has adopted a climate action plan that was done as part of the general plan update process. There are policies in there that do address greenhouse gas reduction, and there are also strategies. I think there's a balance, if I could offer a perspective. Typically, So you have a general plan that has a health and equity section of that general plan. And so in addition to the land use regulations, there's also the health and equity. So I think it might be good, and not necessarily this evening, but I think it might be good for the commission also to refamiliarize yourself with the health and equity portion of the general plan, because there does address kind of broad-based, and they are broad-based, they're not specific strategies, broad-based goals of the city for health and equity. Certainly, Commissioner Fajardo, we can certainly analyze similar to what we did for the mini storage to determine how many other facilities exist in the other cities. We can also do a survey of their current regulations as it relates to any requirements. I think where we start to split hairs, though, is that land use planning, there's limitations on land use planning in terms of what you can do with the issue of equity. Because to the chairperson's, he asked, what is the city's responsibilities? In many ways, that's more of a philosophical question, I think, at this point in this conversation. That is probably a conversation that ultimately you will need to have with your council as their advisory body to share your thoughts and perspective as to what you believe the responsibility, then how that relates to the regulatory environment that you all participate in, as it relates to land use regulations or environmental regulations. So I'm kind of bouncing around here, but the point is that we can do some of the research, that limited research I mentioned at the beginning. I think at the end of the day, that philosophical conversation probably comes forward in some form of communication from the commission to the council, whatever that communication might be, that may result perhaps in changes to some regulations within the city, whether they're significant or minor, I don't know at this time. So I think the one thing, though, that we're not able to do right now probably for you, and I don't, as I stated at the last meeting, I don't have the resources, is to do the in-depth analysis that some or all the commission may want on the equity issue. That's a very, Ken and I were talking about it. There, to use the term loosely, there are a lot of rabbit holes you could go down in that. And I think that's why we're here today, is to really understand and get as firm as we can on what information needs you have, but also be honest with you about our limitations on providing information that not only in the basis of time and resources, but also skill levels. Neither Kendra and I feel that we have the capacity to do the equity level analysis that probably some individuals who are trained in that arena could do a much better job at than we could.
Yeah, understood. I do want to say, though, Kevin, environmental justice is a big priority for the city, right? We have included EJ language in our general plan because it's designated by SB 1000. So it is very, very specific mandate that we need to, as a city, take a look at disproportionate development in how they're affecting these disadvantaged communities. So this is a state mandate, if I understand it correctly, right?
You're correct, and we do that through the CEQA process. When CEQA is required, a component of the CEQA analysis does address environmental justice. So we are doing that, and you are correct that the state added to, for lack of a better word, the required elements in the general plan, and that's why we call it health and equity, because we went beyond just the equity. We did health plus equity, but you are correct.
So maybe this exercise isn't as helpful because it's not giving us the overlay that I think would be really good for us to consider as we would identify. So, so I think maybe for the sake of best utilizing everybody's time, maybe we can talk about a framework for what would be an acceptable task for the planning team to do in this sort of audit. And I think similarly to what we did with the storage facilities, maybe, Kevin, it might be helpful if you could walk us down memory lane and tell us like what that process looked like, and then what were some of the markers that we identified as important to present back to the commission before we submitted a recommendation to council. Because I think that's ultimately what we were interested in seeing, was just seeing some of these data sets, some of these data points, to then, as a commission, decide, is there a recommendation that we would like to make, and then let city council, decide whether it's, the moment to address it.
Before I do that, I wanted to, so some of the data, now granted, this is maybe a couple years old because it's from the general plan, which was adopted in 2019, but there is data within the plan itself. This is the health and equity section of the plan. And as you go further into the plan, you start to see some data sets. Here's an excerpt from Cal Screen. Here's a Healthy Places Index. You start to get into the census tract map of the city. And then here you have a table that addresses the demographics of those census tracts. So I would encourage the commission at your leisure to review the health and equity section of the general plan, because I think not all, but certainly some basic data sets are available in the health and equity section of the chapter of the general plan. So just wanted to call your attention to that. And there's a lot of other good information in here. I think good data. Now, granted, again, this was from the 2019 adoption, so it might be a couple years old. But nevertheless, I think it still gives good context, if nothing else. So I would encourage your eyeballs on that.
So not to be facetious,
Yeah.
but I think the importance of having it be presented here formally is so that we as a commission together could make a recommendation. I think we're all familiar with the general plan, and this is what we do here. The importance of having it presented here formally and to identify some trends is so that as a body we can decide whether this is something worth pursuing or not. And so what I'm asking is, let's talk about the process for the storage facilities, because I think that could be a really good framework for us to focus on, and then give us the information that we need in order to decide whether we do want to make any recommendations.
Sure. But I want to make it clear that there is information available to the commission to review, and it is your responsibility to review that and to get background data. If you're familiar with the general plan and you've read this, great. I suspect that probably you haven't read this chapter in a while. So there is information there available to you that at least provide context. And it will provide maybe a minor substitution for some of the analytical data that we're not able at this time to provide to you, but at least it's background. So to the chair's request, as you may remember, when you started in the conversation on the mini storage facilities, you had a similar concern. Do we have too many? That was the simple question that you started with. And I think you're kind of starting with that question again in this context. You've had a lot come before you. That kind of prompted the question on the mini storage facilities, and I think bluntly it's probably prompting the question now because you've had several come before you, and you have several more coming down the pike potentially, right? So you started with that question. And from that, and that's why we asked you to start funneling down kind of where you want to focus your conversation. Not necessarily tonight, because and we did the same thing with you. We kind of information gathered from you and kind of called down and tried to figure out what is the information that you needed to further your conversation in the next iteration of the conversation. So that's where we're at tonight. Step one is kind of in this funneling mode. You're dumping everything into the top of the funnel, and we're going to start having things kind of go through the funnel, and what comes out is then eventually the information that we will try to provide if it's within our capacity. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. I'm sorry, but it's my job. I got to manage the resources I got, and with the workload that we have, so I may say I can't do that, not because I'm trying to be argumentative, but only because I'm trying to be realistic of what myself and my team can do. So we'll provide you what we can realistically and within the timeframes that you want the information. But I'm also going to be very transparent if we can't do it, and I'm just going to be honest with you about that. So that's why I called your attention to this chapter, because I want you to know that it's there, it has some data, and at least it gives you some context, if nothing else.
Would we be open to receiving some of this information from maybe some of the environmentalist groups like in the area? Like maybe somebody's interested in making this analysis for us. Would that be something that you would be interested in, would be able to come back with?
I mean, the commission can certainly, the commission can certainly ask for outside information. That's within your purview, and you're right. We don't have any financial resources to contract with anyone. Our budget has been set. But if there are groups out there that the commission is aware of individually or collectively that you would ask staff to reach out to see if they have any information that they're willing to share with us, we're happy to do that. That's a email or a phone call. That's easy to do. It's getting the reports written or produced that gets more challenged. But if there's groups out there that you're aware of, again, let us know either tonight or send myself or Kendra an email. Sorry, we had a sidebar there. That's where we're at tonight. Again, we're at the point where we're asking you to kind of funnel it down to something that we know exactly what we're focusing on. So you did that. You kind of got your questions narrowed down, and then you came back and had iterative conversations over, I believe, three meetings following that funneling down, and you ultimately came to a determination, and you did ask us to make interested parties aware, and some of them chose to come and speak to you, and so we can certainly do that again if you would like. We have current applicants, and we have some recent past applicants that we can make aware of this conversation. You can invite them in to get their perspective if that's something you want. I would encourage that. I think it's always important for the participants in the land uses that you are considering possibly making recommendations to the city council to change, for them to have an opportunity to give you their thoughts and opinions. So if that is something you would like to do, then we would certainly make that part of this process, and you need to tell us when you would want to hear from them. So again, you funneled that down, and then you asked staff to develop options. And that's what we did. We presented you in a study session with the various options, and you discussed them. And I believe we had 5, if memory serves me correctly. And they ranged from no changes to lots of changes to potential moratorium. And as you may remember, you ultimately went through the process of developing a recommendation in a public forum to the city council to consider a moratorium on mini storage facilities. You did that earlier this year in spring, and then we took that forward to city council. They considered your recommendation. They heard from members of the public as well, and not all members of the public were in support of that, as they weren't before you. And then the council chose to accept your recommendation, and we're currently in that process. Now, as I mentioned before, we're a little behind in that process, and that's just a capacity issue with the recent hire of our senior planner that you met recently. Kendra and I are starting to get back on track a little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to tackle that very soon in the upcoming month is our plan right now. So that's kind of in a short summary fashion. Happy to go into further detail, but kind of an overview. So that's the kind of process you could go through if you wanted to.
So an idea is, we've hired quite a few consultants, over the years as we went through the general plan, the downtown specific plan. We did all those plans. There was a lot of consultants that literally did a lot of homework, got a really deep dive as to the city, right? Not only where we were, but where we want to be. Do any of them maybe have old data that might give us some of this without having to, it's only a couple years old for some of it. It's not that old, where there might be something that didn't make it into one of the plans, but there might be something we've already paid for all of this. So why couldn't we get access to maybe some of that, if there's anything out there? That was one.
Okay.
My other one is, to me, I don't need every single statistic. Kind of what, in my mind, what I was looking for was, so this map, right? Then like an overlay or mark off, these are our areas of poverty, right? This is the ones that are coming in, right? Statistically speaking, right, a city of our size, I Googled it, statistically speaking, 100,000 residents, I saw anything from 45 to 80 gas stations. The numbers are wide, and that was in a 2-second Google. So maybe if we could have how many gas stations in each of the cities, and I don't know if that's something CVAG or somebody else may be tracking. Palm Springs has 30, La Quinta has 15. What surprised us with the storage units was the huge difference between what we had and what our neighboring cities had, right? So to me, something like that high view, we don't need a lot of details, but just like those three things would really, I think, help us as new development comes in to keep that in mind and say, okay, wait a minute, right? We've done all this homework. This is where we have our concentration areas. Maybe that's not where we need another gas station. Or, oh my God, yeah, that's an area that we do need it and we know that we're not overly saturated statistically speaking. So I don't know if there's ways to, I mean, to me, those like 3 or 4 things is all I'm looking for.
So we can, and as I mentioned earlier, we can survey the other cities like we did with the mini storage facilities, and we can put together a list based on the information that we gather of the number of facilities they have in their, we'll want to narrow that down. Are you just talking fuel stations? Are you talking fuel stations plus convenience markets? So again, we need your guidance. You need to tell us what you're looking for. Is it just the fuel component? Is the fuel plus market component? So you need to guide us. But we can pull that together. We can also do a survey of the current land use regulations that the cities in the valley have as it pertains to that. So for example, you have certain regulations pertaining to certain land uses, drive-throughs, as an example, that you adopted in the Unified Development Code. Well, we can determine if other cities have similar types of special standards beyond the basic zoning standards, setbacks, building height, things like that, where you actually went, and the council agreed with you, you went to an extra step of saying, if you have a drive-through facility, you have to do these other things. We can do that. So we can do those 2 surveys. Your question about, is there data out there? The short answer is, I don't know. A lot of the data is in either the plans or the environmental impact report that the city prepared. So majority of that data, and we can call that environmental impact report and pull what we believe is relevant out of that. That's doable. I can ask the consultants. I suspect that we have all the data that they have. But I can ask. That's not a problem. We still work with them, and they're always very responsive. Again, we have our general plan that I would refer you to, at least as background data. So we can do those things. So I think, Vice Chair, I think we can definitely do those things. That's probably the limit. The mapping gets harder because in order to do overlays, you have to have access to basically the originating data. We don't. So that might be a little bit more difficult, but we'll talk to our GIS analyst and see if there is anything we can do. Maybe it may not be a perfect overlay, but maybe we can borrow and steal, so to speak.
And maybe an overlay is an overstatement. Maybe
Yeah.
just having maps that we can compare, right? This is gas stations, this is poverty, this is,
That may be easier
That
to
may
do.
be easier so that at least we can, I mean, it's hard to look at these maps, even with the colors.
Yeah, so sorry, Kendra was just saying that's what she was trying to show, but it's difficult to see.
It's hard
So
to see.
it may be that the best we could do is have side-by-side comparison maps, and that, may require a little bit more of looking at it, so to speak, but we may be able to at least provide those so you can visually compare the concentrations relative to the CalEnviroscreen mapping.
Yeah, I think that, to me, that would be so much, that would be definitely quite a bit an answer to me, a lot of the questions that we have been discussing. We don't need statistically that's just way too much work, but the idea is to see it, right, side by side. This is the gas stations, this is our poorer neighborhoods, this is, health issues, whatever it is that we want to see. Maybe it's 2 or 3 different maps, but we can pretty much say, here's a section that we see a problem.
I was able to pull up on my phone the disadvantaged and low-income communities investment page that actually shows different levels of those DACs and an area, and I just crudely mapped it on this map. The higher density gas stations that come in the total darker green area from that website that shows those designated areas as such include approximately out of the 22, 16 of the gas stations in that highly concentrated area. Just again, a crude
Right. And
estimate based on my mapping.
That's the level we can provide to you, I believe.
That would be ideal.
We can also provide information on I don't think we've had any gas stations that have been recently approved under the new Highway 111 corridor specific plan, but we have gotten applications in for proposed gas stations. We can show you that information as well. Those are limited land use under the Highway 111 corridor specific plan, so we can kind of mark off, hypothetically, if this were to go through, that would eliminate a limited land use in this section and this section and go down that route as well.
So I think to kind of summarize what the vice chair has asked for and the chair, I think we can get you the 3 or 4 items that you specified. That's within our capacity level. I'm going to probably draw the line at an in-depth equity analysis, but if there are parties, as the chair mentioned, who have information that they would like to share with the city about this issue or about the issue about disadvantaged communities, we're happy to receive that. It's certainly helpful if you know the names of organizations that have information on our community. Please share that with us directly, Kendra and myself, and we'll outreach to them. We'll be happy to provide that. That's really no different than when during the mini storage facility study, you got a market study by one of the proponents who's actually in the process of getting ready to build, and they gave you a copy of a market study that they did. It's the same kind of thing. I think you should also ask for information from the industry. My opinion, I think, as the commission, you should hear from all parties. So, for the parties, when you decide you want to invite parties to the conversation, maybe it's parties from the more environmental side and parties from the industry, and allow them to give you information as they believe it's important for you to understand.
I mean, I'm assuming in the industry there are, organizations that, support or help, the gas station industry, right? I'm sure that there's someone out there that has a study that could come from the market side and then a study that comes from the environmental side. So you're right, we need to get both sides. We can't just have one. And I think between that and these maps, I think that would help us just say, this is a problem. This is not a problem. This could be a problem. And then from there, take us into different directions and discussions, and maybe that would be enough for us to have some kind of recommendation to City Council of maybe we slow down these areas.
Well, and again,
block
remember, similar to the mini storage facilities, you have different policy options. You could have spacing standards. You could say X gas station and X gas station have to be so far apart. You could say that in this area of the city, when you reach a certain number, no more. There's a variety of policy options that the commission can ultimately suggest to the city council, and then ultimately the council will give direction back to the commission in terms of any potential changes to city code. In the case of the mini storage facility, you recommended a moratorium so that there was more time to kind of look at this issue. That is certainly another option you can recommend to the council. So I think, what I'm hearing is we need to go do a little bit of homework and bring it back to you, first and foremost. You need to tell us when you would like to hear from different parties, so that we can, obviously this is a public meeting, they can come anytime, but if you're actually wanting to have a scheduled time to invite people in to get their perspectives, it would be helpful for us to know, and maybe that's a better conversation after we give you the next round of information, and you can tell us at that time, I think we're ready to hear from the groups, or I think we need to get some more information or whatever. So you don't have to necessarily make a decision tonight, but I think at some point you telling us when to do that outreach, purposeful outreach, to bring those folks to a meeting with you, let us know.
So just so that I make sure that I'm following, the next time we meet around this topic, you'll bring back the response to those 4 questions that were just outlined, right?
Yeah.
How many do we have? How does that compare, or we know how many we have, but how does the amount that we have compare to the nearby cities? We're going to have a side-by-side map with some of these things that were outlined. So the next time we meet, we would then discuss the types of policy options we'd like to see back, or are you bringing that also, like, here's the array of land use possibilities?
I think it's a great question. I think we're bringing back that information to you, having the opportunity to continue, well, you'll have it in advance, obviously, but to discuss it amongst the commission, to make sure that you've gotten your questions answered, or at least in terms of the information that you requested, and then to make a determination at that time if you're satisfied. I think at the next point of the conversation, so let's say the meeting after next, I would recommend the commission consider inviting those groups in to hear from them. And I think then once you've done that, I think you're probably at a point where you can start laying out the policy options. Again, we can do that in a preliminary fashion for you, like we did with the mini storage facilities, where we can give you the various options. and then you can discuss those. So you're probably a couple meetings away from discussing the policy options, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I just want to make sure that we're getting, I'm interested in seeing all perspectives, right? I want to hear what the community feels about all of these developments coming out into their neighborhoods. So, I'm really excited for a very robust engagement process that, we can all contribute to without necessarily putting that on staff. We're from the community and we know these communities, so yes, absolutely. The voice of the community, the commercial industry, right? The folks who are developing this, what kinds of studies, how are they making the decisions that they're making? Because I also don't want us to, make any assumptions just based on maps, right? We need to know what is the need and how is it being met, and then how is it being met in relation to the entire region. I feel comfortable with where we are right now and what is next to come. And, I would be very interested to see if there are any organizations that are looking at this more closely that could help contribute, and I think I could be a thought partner with that. So
Yes, I mean, if you're aware, please let us know.
And then also, Kevin, if I may add, would it be possible to also, we can do our own research certainly, but if you're aware of other cities and what they've done to move in that direction with respect to, what we're discussing, as a possibility of there being additional resources or data points that we can also exhaust. And I'd be interested to know just what the implications are from both sides based on what's the law read? Then in 2035, that they're banning the sale of gasoline-only vehicles in California, and what the implications of that might be for these mom-and-pop gasoline stations going forward. Again, just hearing that information, I think, can allow us to make a more intelligent, decision as to how we move forward.
And I think the latter one's a little bit hard because I don't think anyone knows what that means, to be honest with you. I mean, there's still going to be millions and millions of gasoline-powered cars on the road, even if we transition away from that towards electrical vehicles. So I think that might be interesting to hear from the market players, because I think they will have certain perspectives. I'm aware of at least one community in the state of California that has that no longer allows gas stations, and they made a purposeful decision to do that. It's up in the Bay Area, or near the Bay Area. So we can certainly just do a kind of a quick survey, if you will, of what other cities have done. So just to reiterate, we're going to come back to you with side-by-side maps. We will come back to you with the number similar to what we did. And I guess a clarifying question. When we did this comparison, we limited it to adjacent communities. We did Coachella, Bermuda Dunes, Palm Desert, and La Quinta. We kind of stopped there. Do you want to go to the entire valley, or do you want to stay with that kind of somewhat eastern-oriented survey?
Based on our population size, is there a comparable city within Riverside County that's close to us, meeting like the 100,000 mark, almost the 100,000 mark?
I'm sure, off the top of my head, I'm sure there are several. I don't know the populations per se, but I think the question is are there some comparable sized cities to look at?
Because we're the
the
largest
biggest.
city compared, like when we compare it to Coachella, pretty much, but we have much of, larger population compared to Coachella, Desert Hot Springs, Palm Springs,
Right.
Indian Wells.
We can do go ahead.
There are some cities in Riverside County that have comparable population size. Murrieta is one of them. There's also some San Bernardino County cities as well that are close in population. So if you'd like to consider those, we can add those in there, just because I think San Bernardino County may have a few more cities that are comparable to Indio in size.
And again, since I'm going to manage the workload here a little bit, I think we could probably reasonably do, say, 3 or 4 representative comparable sized cities. But I probably want to limit it that just so that we can manage workload again. But so we'll do the kind of the same cities we did for the mini storage plus 3 to 4 comparable size cities, in Riverside and San Bernardino County. And Kendra and I will kind of figure out what those are. And but I think, yes, there are several. So we'll do that as kind of the focus. We'll look at the number in there. We'll look at what the current regulations they have. whether they're just the basic regulations that I mentioned earlier or basic plus additional regulations. And then, what am I missing?
One of the maps we wanted was the income or poverty level, disadvantaged communities. That's what I was-
Do you want me to, I can read the,
Thank you, if
Yes.
you wouldn't mind.
so one of them is how many gas stations in each of the neighboring cities, and we're limiting that to eastern Coachella Valley and comparable cities in Riverside County and San Bernardino County. How many gas stations should a city of our size typically have, or what's the typical number? An overlay on the map outlining the low-income disadvantaged communities in the city of Indio. What standards do we have for gas stations as far as spacing standards, regulations, limited land uses, and what do other neighboring cities in the Coachella Valley and beyond have for those as well? A side-by-side comparison of the maps, and how do we compare with the amount of gas stations in other cities in our neighboring cities? And what have other cities done as far as moving toward policy action to either limit or, curb the amount of gas stations that are coming in?
And then, if possible, maybe we could ask one of the developers that currently there's gas stations that have been proposed, right? So maybe they have a market study that they can send that you can include as part of your packet when you send out the agenda. We don't need a full-on presentation, but it'd be interesting for us to read if they have it, maybe.
We can ask. I would suspect that that's going to be pretty hard to pry from their hands because that's proprietary and often competitive. But we'll ask, and they may or may not agree to that. One question you have not answered that I think is important is, are you only focusing on the gas station? But most gas stations are now developed with convenience markets, so they kind of go hand in hand, if you will. So when you're talking about this, are you talking about both uses on the site or just the fuel station use?
I think both.
Because on one end, if I may, also there's, concerns perhaps of the types of food that these convenience stores sell that could also have an impact on, the well-being and the safety of our community members.
So now and that's an example of where we could go down another
In a
rabbit
side,
hole.
and we're not going down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole, but at least knowing that information up front,
Yeah.
I think is helpful especially for those that have those types of concerns.
Yes.
But certainly the focus is on the gas stations.
And I
But
would say
I do-
that-
I do want to say that it's a shame that we don't have the capacity or the ability to dedicate staff time to do that type of analysis, and the reason is because that is really at the core, right, of what planning is meant to do, right? It's for healthy communities that thrive, designing a city to serve the residents, not specifically the market. And so, I just want to say, I understand the limitations, but I think that truly is at the heart of the question, is the equity metrics. And so, I understand, Kevin. I get it. I know. But I just wanted to make sure that I get that out, because for me, that is truly what is important, is how are these land use decisions affecting the communities? And ultimately, we're getting some of these projects coming into mixed-use zoning, which we have for housing, and we saw housing burden, and we know what that serious numbers are. And so that, to me, I think that's where we need to take this. And I don't know that where we are and the capacity that we have is going to give us that information, but that's what I'm interested in, truly, are the land use designations, our current policies, really serving those disadvantaged communities? Are we creating more issues by allowing these types of developments to come into land use designations that are meant to serve these populations, housing, healthy food, clean air, all of the things that are meant to be in the EJ element or EJ language within the general plan? And so I wanted to say that publicly because that's behind my intention, and I think it's important, but it's unfortunate that we don't have the capacity or the staff time to be able to do that. So I'm hoping that somebody will want to give us all of that information.
So and I appreciate that, and part of my job is to manage the resources, and sometimes I have to be the one that just kind of does the blunt talk, and I am, but I understand and appreciate the concerns you have, Chair. Remember, you as a commission can also recommend to the council that it consider budgeting for studies and things like that. So if that's part of your recommendation to city council at some point to, include in the next fiscal year budget a study of X, funding for a study of X, then you certainly can recommend that. So it's, even if there's limited capacity on the part of staff to do the work, that doesn't mean that if there is budget for it, we couldn't go out and hire that assistance like we did for all the plans that the Vice Chairman referenced.
Can we get that information? I'm pretty sure like we pay to organizations like CVAG and CVEP or SCAG. We should be able to kind of pull from some of that data, right, as well?
Whether they have the data or not, I don't know, but we could certainly ask.
Can I just make a quick statement? I think I agree with you that the data is so important, but I think just the fact that we're having this conversation, first of all, the fact that even these maps that we're going to start looking at is such a different way of looking at the city, and I think it's such a great improvement that I completely understand the staff limitations, but I think even with this little bit, we can make a very big impact, and I think it's a great place to start.
And I appreciate that. I do want to say one thing to, and I didn't want Commissioner Farrar to feel like I was in any way dismissing the concern about the food. There are, in fact, there's an example, I believe in the last year in North Palm Springs where there was a land use entitlement, and as part of that, they were required to have a certain percentage of healthy foods. So that is not something that is off the table. What I'm trying to do is just keep the focus to as much as possible. That may be another topical area that the commission may want to look at as it relates to certain land uses and extraordinary requirements. Just again, I'm using the drive-through as an example. That was a particular situation, if memory serves me correctly, where there was a quote-unquote food desert. There were no grocery stores, nothing no easy access to healthy food options. So in that, there was a negotiation between the city and the developer to provide that healthy food access. So that's, again, I'm not trying, and I don't want the commissioner to feel anyway I was discounting, or the rest of the commission, but for the moment, if we can, kind of keep, at least for now, and if there's additional areas you want to add on once you have more data, then we can do that. But I'm kind of trying to get this animal a little bit corralled. So.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time now and allowing us to. And I just want to echo the Vice Chair's comments. I think it's a very powerful conversation, and I want to thank you and the staff for being able to get us to this point even and moving us forward. So I'm really excited to see some of this information that you bring back, and I'm hoping that CVAG or some of these folks might be able to contribute to that conversation for reports that they might have already done that we're looking at. And and I'm really excited for us to be considering land use as it best serves particularly these disadvantaged communities. I think it's a wonderful conversation, and thanks to the commission and to staff for being able to have it.
One other quick question I have for you. So you had mentioned, Chair, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when you invite commentary, we will make purposeful outreach to organizations that we're aware of or that you advise us of, any member of the commission. We will make outreach to parties that have developed these kind of facilities recently or are developing so that they have an opportunity, and we'll reach out to any known industry representatives. Members of the public, I think I heard the chair say that he was encouraging the commission to be ambassadors to the community, to make them aware of this conversation if they want to come in and participate in that. So we will not be doing any extraordinary outreach to the general community, but obviously if members of the public want to come and participate in that, they're certainly invited to come, whether it's virtually or in person, and obviously that'll be an agendized conversation, so it will be a public conversation. But I just want to make sure we're kind of all on the same collective page about that part. Okay.
And if we could, maybe the energy, we're going to be reaching out to the market people, right? Whatever time you're dedicating to that, let's dedicate to maybe develop a flyer that we can share on social media, and reach out to some of the nonprofits in the area that are working with the community to help us disseminate that. And I think that's free outreach. So just whatever time you're going to take to make calls to the market people, let's just see if we could maybe put together a little quick
Yeah, we can work with our social media person to put something on the city's website, just encouraging, or making folks aware of the conversation. We don't typically do flyers. To be honest with you, most everything's done social media wise now, so we're really heading that way. But your point's well taken.
A digital version of a
digital
flyer.
version of a
Digital
flyer,
version
yes.
of a flyer,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay,
We don't,
yeah, thank
we
you.
don't need to print 1,000 flyers
Okay,
and throw
thank
them in
you.
the air.
That's kind of where I was going.
And my apologies if I'm interrupting anyone. Can you all hear me? The City Attorney Jillian Mertens. Excellent. I just wanted to add that I will also look into the information that is provided pursuant to SB 535, which relates specifically to the disadvantaged communities 2022 census tract updates. Has provided a lot of information that we can plumb from the state as it relates to this question. So I'd be more than happy to be point person on that item as well.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thank you.
So I guess with that, unless there are any final questions for Kendra or myself, or any other thoughts that the commission has, or any other conversations you want to have. Again, this is the only item on the agenda, so the time is yours, and we're happy to continue the conversation, but we have our proverbial marching orders. We know what we need to do, so if there's nothing else, we're happy to let you move on to other parts of the agenda or keep going. It's up to you.
No, I think we're good here, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking that on. Okay, commissioner comments, please.
So I just want to point out that as I was driving in today, that new COD building looks phenomenal. I was like, that's a cool building. So I was very excited to see that with the colors and the name up and everything. So I think when the next one is completed, that's going to look even better. And when our city hall and all that's done, it's going to be a whole new downtown. And some of these apartments, I hope, are coming in soon. But I just wanted to make that observation that I was very impressed.
I had a quick question, kind of out of left field. A few weeks, or maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we approved for a Revivals furniture retail space over there by El Super, and that's not what it became. It became an Amazon pallet. You know what kind of store I'm talking about, where
I
they
do.
just dump pallets and people dig through them and
So,
scramble for bargains?
We worked with Revivals to relocate them because they had an electrical service issue in that building and it didn't fit their timeline. So they're now over in the, where the Food for Less is, which I cannot remember the name of that complex, I apologize. That business that you referenced would be allowed. They have to come in and do an administrative review with us. Right now, they're currently operating on a temporary use permit. And they are only allowed to operate with that temporary use permit until February. Absent that, they will need to shut down. But they are temporarily using that space for that purpose unless they get that administrative review.
And that's all done in-house?
It's all done administratively under the codes. It was allowed. Obviously, the business has put up what appears to be permanent signage, so we believe their intent is to operate there, and that is under the codes that the Unified Development Code, it's administrative.
Okay. I was just curious as to why that wouldn't come back in front of us, because that's the type of operation that I don't think is ideal for our new 111 corridor and what we're shooting for there.
Well, you in adopting the Unified Development Code, you made those type of decisions director level. Now, you can always reconsider that and bring back a recommendation ultimately to the council to modify, to require. In the past, they required more review by the commission, but under the current regulations, it's done at the director or designee level. So it's certainly something you can, if the commission is inclined to develop an update to that. But that's how it sits today.
But then that would affect like all, because I remember that when it came to us, it had everything to do with like square footage, like how big the project was and what's under your purview, right? So would that affect all projects that are of a specific size?
No, this was different. It was an administrative conditional use permit. You're talking about the administrative design review, where it was for buildings that are for commercial It was up 5,000 square feet, greater than 5,000 square feet for industrial, greater than 10,000 square feet. This is more in the land use context, that the use that the commissioner was referencing is allowed under administrative conditional use permit, which is done at my level. But again, you could make a recommendation to council to elevate that back up to a conditional use permit public hearing, which comes before the commission. But the Unified Development Code right now does assign that authority to my position.
Wasn't there a thing where we could actually request to have one of those come before us if we found it interesting, or was that the conditional use, not the administrative?
That was the call-up procedures, and I believe, I'd have to check the regulations, but I believe that applied only to the design review component, but I'd have to double check that.
That could definitely be something we might want to look at.
I got another left field for you here to follow suit, Kevin. I know tonight's the night. We're on a good one, sir. But it has to do with Parks and Rec. He's like, oh, that enthusiastic, oh. Obviously, just wanting to know what our responsibility as a planning commission is when it comes to that. Should there ever be an opportunity for us to review that? And then secondly, I understand the parks might be closing as a result of maybe some upkeep and whatnot. And the only question I had, and I promised I would bring it up, is if we could maybe allow for a few to be open, because there's some Pop Warner groups that need fields to, utilize as a result of there being a need for them to use our parks. So that's my second question. I know it probably has nothing to do with this body, but certainly I would bring it up.
So there is a Community Services Commission that does work with staff, not planning staff, but other department staff on parks and recreation. So the Community Services Commission, that's typically their area of purview. There were some challenges recently, as I understand, with some of the parks and homeless population, and some damage that was caused. At our last council meeting, our Public Works Director did talk about a new program that is being explored, and it would be a program that's modeled after other programs in other cities, working with Desert Recreation District to have individuals who would, I believe the term is park ambassadors, but I could be wrong in any regard. So that is being worked on right now by our Public Works Director and his team, and then would ultimately be brought to council for approval. So I know that there's been some challenges, but I know there's active work to try to make sure that those parks, obviously the facilities that are utilized by organized groups, that is done in close coordination with our staff, and the staff, the community services staff works with those groups to have access to fields and other parts in our city. But happy, I believe, I could be in error, but I believe the next council meeting there will be more information about that program I just talked about that's been utilized in other cities, and I'm happy to send that to the commission just as an information item once it's the agenda's published.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate
And
that.
I wanted to speak on that. My apologies again if I'm interrupting. But I'm actually working on an ordinance that the city council will be considering that related to parks and other city facilities. And so at present, it's scheduled for the second council meeting in October. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we are working on that item as the legal team is also working on it to ensure that as many parks as possible are kept open and orderly. So.
Jen, and I promise.
It's left field night here.
As we are growing in our city, in my old age, we have buildings throughout in downtown, in I say Old North Side, not the New North Side, but even within our downtown area. What are we doing to preserve some of those buildings or homes? I understand there's like some. I noticed that some other cities like have like a historical site preservation board. I know that's another added layer of bureaucracy for our city, but just to kind of protect some of these buildings that have been around since the early 1900s, or if they haven't been burned down yet, is there anything that we have at our city currently or in the past to kind of protect those buildings, or maybe perhaps it'd be a great key point for our museum, in the future? But just other than moving a school to your site, is there anything that we currently have in place?
So some of the commission may or may not remember, but you actually are the historic preservation body for the city. That was some change in duties. It used to be Public Arts and Historic Preservation Commission. Now it's Public Arts Commission, and historic preservation duties were assigned to this commission. That was done a few years ago. The city does not currently have an active historical preservation program. And there are various ways you can do that. You can do it with a local designation, which is, and usually those are incentivized to incentivize property owners to retain the property in some historical condition. There is state historical designation, and then there's federal historical designation. So there is a variety of different ways to approach this, but right now the city doesn't currently have an active program. That is something that this commission, again, in your advisory capacity to the city council, you could recommend that the city explore activation of such a program. I have been involved in several. I will tell you, they're a lot of work. They're not always, there is controversy sometimes around that, because depending on what's being designated, not all property owners want that. So sometimes you have to be really careful about how that designation process occurs. But it's certainly something that the commission, again, you are entrusted and responsible in part of your duties for historic preservation. So if you wanted to start another conversation about that, you certainly could, and develop recommendations to council for a program implementation.
Just to add to that, all projects that are coming into the city newly developed or going into areas where there may be historical resources, they have to be evaluated under CEQA as well. So it's also being accounted for on that end as well prior to development.
Brought before us, at least in the last 4 years.
No, you have not, and that, again, you would need to have a kind of a formalized program in order to have something brought before you, because technically right now, a federal designation, National Register of Historic Places, is typically done outside of local government. It's usually the local and state process that is where the local government gets involved. So, no, but again, you as a commission would have to ultimately make a recommendation to your city council if you felt this was something that thought the city would want to go down the road of. I can appreciate, I ran across a picture of downtown Indio recently. It's now my screensaver, and it was from 1935, and it looked entirely different than today. There were a lot of buildings there that don't exist anymore. It's great to see. There are communities that do work on preservation of structures like that. I will tell you, it gets very challenging in the building code arena, because you are trying to maintain the historic value of structures, but they oftentimes need modernization, particularly with heating and cooling, and also with electrical and plumbing. So typically what you'll see with a lot of historic preservation efforts with buildings, it's focused on the exterior preservation, not necessarily the interior preservation.
All right, this was a great meeting. All right, so if there are no more commissioner comments, we'll move over to staff items.
Nothing major to report, just a couple of things of interest. We Kendra and I have put together a schedule, and we'll send that out to you, that will kind of show your level of activity for the next 4 months. We did this in part to help manage our time, but also to advise the commission and also applicants of where they kind of fit in the queue. I think you will see that pretty much now through January, there's a lot going on, a lot of projects coming before you and or city council. So that is going on. We also are seeing, a slight lull, I would say. We're actually, Kendra and I were talking about that today in terms of permit submittal activity. This is kind of reminiscent of, I would say, kind of 2021, when we saw a little bit of a lull, and then the first of the year hit, and we got crazy again. So this may be the lull before the storm, so to speak. But we have plenty of things for you to be looking at and discussing. So I guess stay tuned. We'll send out that schedule to you. Obviously, things can change in that schedule, but it'll be as current as it can in the moment. Kendra?
I was just going to add, at the next Planning Commission meeting, you guys are going to be hearing the continued project that Kevin brought forward for the gas station, and then there may or may not be a project consultation for some affordable housing projects as well.
Jessica just reminded me to remind you that we went ahead and canceled November 22nd. We didn't think you'd want to be hanging out with us the day before Thanksgiving. Please enjoy your family time. One additional information sharing, just try to be keeping you updated through the process, is at the last council meeting, they did approve the community benefit agreements that were required for all 5 cannabis operators. These community benefit agreements specify the rights and responsibilities of the operators and the city. They included a 6% contribution that would be part of the annual gross receipts that would be paid. 6%, excuse me, let me say that again. 6% of gross receipts paid on a quarterly basis at a minimum. So that is something that is in there. We also, there is a specification for 1% community benefits that go to organizations or programs in the city. And all of this has to be documented and provided to the city. So that's the second to last step. Right now, we are working on finalizing the actual business permit and hope to have those issued in the near future. Those were issued under the authority of the city manager per the adopted city code. And then at that time, the city process is finished. And then they would go through and finish their state process. And several have indicated they hope to open around the first of the year, assuming that they can go quickly through the state process. So we're kind of wrapping up that process. As a reminder, there is a total of 5 cannabis operators that were authorized by the regulations and were approved by the city council in their July 26th meeting. Happy to answer any questions, either of us, if you have any questions for us. Any more left field questions?
Yeah, you don't want to go down that route again. Thank you very much. I think we're good. Yeah, okay. All right, so if we're done with staff items, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting to the next Planning Commission meeting on Wednesday, October 11th, 2023.